Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I have a special treat for everyone today. My guest that will be joining me is a researcher, writer, publisher. Most recently, he's the new studio manager of the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And he is also one of the three all amazing hosts of the High Strangeness Factor on that network. And he is also my emotional support British person. So hang tight, and I will be right back with Andy Mercer. Andy, thanks for joining me today.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm really glad we get to have a chat and possibly go down the road of one of my favorite pastimes of doing some Warren bashing.
Oh, yes. They will play a part in our story tonight. That's for definite. But first, I've got to say, it's quite amazing. This is the first time ever, I think, it's been just the two of us talking about a third person who often crops up when we do stuff online. So, yes, it's interesting to find no Mr. Ward tonight.
There's no one here to watch us. We can do whatever we want.
Oh, yeah. The old man has left the building. The old man.
The reason I asked you here was to talk about one thing specifically, although I'm sure we might digress from that a bit. But
there's a chance.
The subject came up when I talked to Stevie from the Truth or Demons podcast recently about the Warrens, because you have some extensive knowledge on the Enfield Poltergeist.
Yes, it's a topic that has fascinated me for many, many years. From when I was quite young, I first heard about it, and it is a fascinating case. I think it's quite possibly one of the most, certainly over here in the UK, most documented cases of all. The amount of information that's been gathered and research has been done on this, on this case is amazing. Right from the beginning, when it really first started kicking off, they've the audio and some mainly photography, some video work, but mainly audio is amazing. How much they managed to gather of the Enfield Poltergeist itself, the Enfield haunting, as is also known as, which, as I say, is the Enfield in North London, rather than there's an Enfield over there that's had some strange activity. But this is the original Enfield, shall we say?
Yeah, and I think a lot of Americans know about it, but a lot of people probably only know about it from the Conjuring franchise. It was Conjuring 2.
Mm-hmm.
Then.
Well, funnily enough, I have to say, I really like that movie. I really do enjoy it. It's great fun. It's very, very far from what actually really happened in the house. I mean, the basics are still roughly the same, but for example, I'm sure we'll get into a bit later on, but the Warrens' involvement is slightly exaggerated, to say the least, as in hardly over there. But it, as I say, as a case, it has become internationally recognised. I mean, there's been a number of books and a number of TV programmes have actually been made about it, not just over here, but over there. Well, when I say over here, I mean UK, over there where you are as well. There was one on fairly recently by Apple TV that was very, very good, where they actually used some of the audio recordings, which we'll talk about in a minute. And they had people lip syncing the audio as if they were giving actual interviews. And it was very, very good, very accurate, because it was using visual recordings, of course, in compared to what was going on compared to the movie that we just mentioned, which has so many flaws in it. It's quite ridiculous, but I'm sure we'll get onto that.
Yeah. For anyone that only knows it from the movie, can you high level kind of give us the cliff notes on what actually happened?
Yeah, I'll give you sort of a rundown from how it already began. You've got to take yourself back to 1977 in the UK, in Enfield, which is in North London. The house itself was fairly ordinary. It was just a little 4-bedroom house, a 2-bedroom house, I should say. No, 3-bedroom house. It was a small 3-bedroom house. We'll come back to that. But in a place called Green Street in Enfield, let's say North London. And it really all began sort of in the late summer, August 1977, when the mother of the house, if you like, there was 4 kids in the house, 2 daughters, Janet and Margaret, and 2 boys, John, and the other kids' names escaped me, but they're not so important. It's more Margaret and Janet are the main people that were involved in what happened. The first thing that was noticed was just odd knocks on the wall. Nothing spectacular. So the occasional knock and bang. It was unusual. The girls were aware of these noises, but didn't think too much of it at first. But they started to increase. They were occurring more and more often. Obviously, they told the mum. The mum investigated, found no obvious cause, no loose pipes or anything like that could be causing the noises. But the noises quickly developed into something more. On one particular occasion, the first real kind of, so we say, violent occurrence was when the two girls were going to bed. Mum, Peggy, was in the room with them, and all of a sudden a chest of drawers moved across the room and actually blocked the door, which, not surprisingly, scared the life out of it. Peggy mum was able to move it out of the way to get open the door, only for it to move back again and again block the door. So this rather scared her, you can probably imagine. So, cut some of the story shorter, they contacted the local police, which I didn't really know why I contacted the police, but I don't think I knew who else to speak to, really. This was all very new and strange for Peggy. She was a single mum. Her husband had left a long time ago, so it was just her and the girls and the two boys. Now, one of the boys, actually, John, was away from the house for quite a bit at the time. We don't know exactly what was wrong, but I think he had delinquent, basically. He was taken away to sort of somewhere a bit calmer and quieter. So it was mainly just the youngest boy. His name has escaped me. I do apologise, but he has escaped me. And the two girls. They were quite concerned about this, and the police did come and had a look around the house, and almost thankfully for them, the mum and the girls, something actually happened in front of one of the police officers. That she saw a chair lift slightly off of the ground and move a couple of feet across the room, and the police officer actually gave an interview to the local news media describing what she'd seen. And of course this opened up floodgates, because the local newspapers got hold of the story, and quite quickly it descended upon the house, with various news agencies, both locally and nationally. One particular paper over here called the Daily Mirror really ran with the story about this ghostly hauntings and supernatural occurrences happening in the house. At this particular point, it was mainly objects being moved around and knocks and bangs on the walls, that sort of thing. It was nothing else happening, because obviously there's a rather famous element of the story which we'll get onto in a little while. But at this particular point, it was just the movement of objects and the bangs and knocks on the walls. They'd become quite noisy, and mainly at night, mainly in the girls' bedroom, as usually often happening. And it got to the point that Peggy and the girls and the boy would leave the house and go and stay with a neighbour. Now, it was her brother-in-law lived just down the road, so they would stay with them often overnight if things got particularly bad. And of course, as I say, more and more coverage in the news about this, it became quite a story in the press, and the Society for Psychical Research, the PSR, picked up on the story. They were interested to find out more about it, so they dispatched a relatively new member of their group, shall we say, their organisation, called Maurice Grosse. Now, Maurice himself was semi-retired. He's had been an engineer and was inventing things, and he had the good fortune of winning a few £1,000s on what was called the football calls, which he won 8,000, which in the 1970s was quite a lot of money, enough for him to basically retire and carry on doing his inventing. He'd become quite known for a few inventions. He had about 30 odd patents registered, and one of the best known ones, which you're probably too young to remember, but did you have in America, we have like the billboards that would be a picture and it would roll over to another one after a few minutes, and another one. Maurice Grosse invented that, the machinery behind it. It was very successful, sold around the world. So he was quite a wealthy man. It was reasonable. So he had all the free time in the world to investigate the case. Apparently, according to the SPR themselves, he had made a bit of a nuisance of himself, was always begging for a case to research, wanted to find something. So as soon as this one came up, I thought, Maurice Grosse, we'll get him off there. And Maurice turned up with recording equipment and spent the next 18 months almost pretty much daily at the house, investigating all the various noises and things that were going on. Sorry, I need a drink. So it's very hot here at the moment.
I love your cup, though.
Oh, yes, dead man's finger glass. Bit of a rum fan. It's only water in here, I have to say, but yes. A rather nice glass. But yeah, so he turned over his equipment and started to catalogue and record the noises and the bangs, and something else started to happen that probably has made the case even more famous, quite unusual, because one of the girls started to produce a voice, or at least at first, the voice seemed to come from the room. They didn't seem to know where it was coming from. It seemed to emanate almost from the room itself. There was no obvious direction it was coming from. But it became quite clear quite quickly that it was coming from Janet. She seemed to be producing a voice of what sounded very much like an older man speaking. In fact, so one of the very first recordings Maurice Gross had of the voice was more of an animal noise, like a growl, a gruff, sort of ruff, ruff, ruff. And Maurice actually heard in the recording saying, "If you can make a noise, can you say my name? Can you say my name?" And you hear, ruff, ruff, Maurice. And so he actually says the name. But as I say, at the beginning, it was more like a dog bark than an actual person speaking. But gradually, over coming weeks, it started to develop more into an actual speaking voice, very much of an older man who Janet would seem to go into some kind of almost trance-like state. So it was described, and then this voice would start to come from her. It was witnessed by various people, including other members of the SPR and local media, who managed to record some of these voices. I say Morris has recorded a lot of it, but also the media caught some of it. The case was getting even more publicity, even more interesting, and it was felt that because Morris was a relatively new investigator, it would be better if somebody else who had more experience got involved in the case. So into the scene, a guy called Guy Lyon Playfair, who was a much more senior member of SPR, who'd done a lot of investigating around the world. He'd done quite a bit of work in Africa as well with some of the tribes out there, and seen some extraordinary things occurring with them that he'd observed firsthand, and he'd written about it. So he become quite a well-known figure within the sort of ghost hunting establishment of that time. Initially, Maurice Gross was a bit suspicious of Guy Lyon. He thought he's come here to sort of either take over or disprove or whatever. But it was clear quite quickly that Guy Playfair was very much interested in Noah as well, and was very much involved, was very much a believer as well. Indeed, throughout his whole life, he was very determined to say that this was a genuine case, no matter what. Of all that he'd seen around the world, this one stood out as being the most believable. So it all continued. Again, lots of movement of objects, furniture being moved, bangs and knocks, and also the voice continued. It clearly sounded like an older man. It was quite difficult for a girl of about 12, 13 years old to have created with her own voice. So it would seem it was very much an old man's voice. But some of the things and the way it would talk, what it would ask about, was odd. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd expect an older man to ask about, things like puberty and how that works and how it lasts. It's the sort of things that a young girl might want to ask herself, but feel too embarrassed to ask by herself. So maybe would create a voice to do that. So actually the voice started to identify itself, gave itself a name of Bill Wilkins, which was interesting because obviously a real name of Bill Wilkins could be researched. And to say the voice is that's what his name was. And he had actually died in the house, died of a brain hemorrhage, and died in a chair that was in the house, which in itself quite spooky. We'll come back to that because I want to go a bit more about what happens next, because it was really quite interesting how this band has built and developed. But at the time, the name was noted, but no one knew who he was. Could you find a name? Possibly. I mean, she was a 12-year-old girl. She couldn't really have gone looking for a local name in like local records, because where would you go for a start? Maybe the local library, but would they let her see those kind of records? Unlikely. So where did you get the name from? Was it just made up out of the blue? Well, as we will see, it wasn't, or didn't seem to be. They tried various experiments with the voice to see how it was being produced, including taping her mouth up and still having the voice come out, which was a bit bizarre, because if her mouth taped, where the hell is it coming from? How could it be that she'd still speak quite clearly with tape over her mouth? The only time it didn't work is they then put water in her mouth and taped it off, which you think a bit more torture than anything else now, but it was an experiment to see what the voice was coming from. And apparently the voice didn't come with a mouthful of water and taped up. So you do wonder how she's able to produce a voice like that. Well, I think it was a voice was real coming from her. It wasn't like she was just and words were coming out. It was literally her vocal cords were making the voice. They talked about what they call the false vocal cords. Could be where it's coming from, which are obviously false vocal cords that are higher up in the throat, that you can get them to vibrate, and it will sound very creaky like that. But you can't do it for very long before it starts to really hurt, unless you're a former death metal singer like me, who can do it for quite a long time. If you're not practicing doing it, and as a kid, it would have been quite painful quite quickly. So that would be the physicality of how the voice was being produced, but where it was coming from in the sense of the words and how it was being said, that was the mystery. Was it simply Janet making it up herself, or was it real? We can't really say. But again, you've got dozens, hundreds of hours of recordings, often of the voice talking about various things that some seem relevant, some not. So it wasn't particularly aggressive. It was a bit rude, a bit sharp, like an old grumpy old man might be. There were certainly no signs of any demonic possession or anything like that. It was just this person's voice. But as the case was getting more and more famous, it was spreading around the world and came to the attention of certain two demonologists in America. Now, of course, we know who we're talking about here. Now, of course, they got word of all of this, and it was a big story. So, of course, they packed their bags and headed off to the UK. Uninvited, I have to say. They literally turned up at the house without any real kind of announcement who they were. Said that they were famous investigators from America, which they were, but that was it. They weren't invited over. They just sort of turned up. They stayed for about a day, made some recordings themselves of the voice, were interested, but of course, Mr. Warren, being Mr. Warren, suggested it was a demonic possession. There was something evil afoot here. But also was overheard saying that there's money to be made out of this. At which Guy Lyon Playfair, who'd kind of been suspicious from the start, Morris was more enthusiastic because it was somebody else involved, but Playfair was suspicious and promptly asked them to leave, and which they did. So they were there for about a day, and that was it. That was the sum total of their involvement. But of course, would have us believe that it was much more involved in all this nonsense about what they did and didn't do, but I'm not sure we can talk about it in a moment. But getting back to the real story, it was becoming more famous, more well-known. A ventriloquist who was famous at the time came to visit the girls to see if he could determine whether or not the voice was real or was her using some kind of skill that she developed. And he was convinced it was her, that she was throwing a voice and she just learned how to do it quite quickly, quite easily. Again, how? Who could have trained her? Don't know. But he was convinced that was it. The voice was just mimicry, it was her mucking about. Some of the people from the SPR, Psycho Research, were also of the opinion that this didn't seem real. It was too much. It was, again, as I said before, asking the wrong kinds of questions, saying the wrong kinds of things that you wouldn't imagine a man who was 67, I think he's supposed to have been, would have asked. And there was also the question about whether or not the chair in the house really was the chair he died in, whether it belonged there or not. Peggy said when she moved in, some of the furniture was already there, some of them got rid of it, and her husband was there with her. So whether the real actual chair was in the house or not, don't really know. As he didn't specify which chair he died in, of course, just died in a chair in the house. So it was really kind of become almost a bit monotonous. It wasn't really going anywhere. There was still objects being thrown around, moved about, and the voices was occurring. And it was only when Guy Lyon Playfair invited a medium to come and talk to the two girls that things actually changed. Now, according to Guy Lyon, I've actually interviewed him. I was part of an interview that was done with a guy a few years ago. There was a friend of his who was a spiritualist, came along to talk to the girls about what was going on and see if he could help. He was in the house with just the two girls and himself for a couple of hours, and everything almost stopped afterwards. It seemed to slow right down. The voice almost disappeared, and the instances of objects moving and the bangs almost stopped. It came right down to a minimal level. That was really kind of the end of the story. It just seemed to more or less stop. There was no sign of anything dramatic occurring for a long time afterwards. I mean, the family remained in the house for years afterwards, and eventually Margaret passed away. Actually, she did pass away in the house, and the girls grew up and got married and moved away, as did the boys. So the house itself obviously still stands. It's an ordinary private house, probably owned now, in North London. And according to at least the last two residents I know of, nothing's ever happened in the house since they left. It all seemed to stop once they vacated the property. I mean, you can walk down the street now, and interestingly, if you go onto Google Street View and look for the house, I won't say the address, but you can look it up, it's easy to do. It's actually blurred out. You can't actually see the house. It places a blur filter over it. I do know someone I know actually went along a couple of years ago and was doing all those sort of selfie videos talking outside the house, and the owner of the house came out and told him to F off. So they obviously got fed up of all the visitors, because obviously it died away until the Conjuring 2 came out, and of course everyone was turning up to the doorstep again to view it. So that's really the basic of the story. As I say, the voice has become the famous element of the story, but to me that's a sideshow. Personally speaking, I don't know. I don't believe it was a ghost of an old man talking through her. It may be that it was a conscious action on her part. I'm not so sure. I think it may be some kind of subconscious activity going on, like almost like creating an eternal father figure, because there wasn't a father around, and she was eternally relating to a father figure, and then asking the kind of questions that she'd want to ask as a young girl, but didn't feel she could. So this voice, this father figure voice, was asking him. So you could say maybe she made it all up, except Bill Wilkins existed. He was real. Some years after the case kind of really came to a close and became quiet, a man contacted Maurice Groves and said, basically, that's my father. That even sounds like my father. He lived in that house. He passed away in 1967, and he's buried in the local cemetery. Check the records. Yes, it genuinely was. It was this man's was Bill Wilkins' son. Bill Wilkins had lived in the house and had passed away. So the question becomes, where the hell did Janet get the information from? As I say, you could get those kind of records from a place called Somerset House back in those days in London, but there's no way a 12, 13-year-old girl will be allowed to access those records, much as looking and be able to know what to do to find them. So where she got the name from is a mystery. One suggestion that has been put forward that maybe a piece of paper or letter was found in the house, was addressed to him. But if it was, no one's ever seen it. Janet herself says she never found anything like that. So we are left with the mystery of where Janet got the name from, because it was correct. So you could go along the lines of maybe some kind of deep subconscious process that was creating that voice. But again, how did you have the information? But for me, I think what gets lost in this story is the physical activity, the actual poltergeist activity. Because, of course, a voice speaking through somebody is not a poltergeist. That's not a poltergeist that's comes to that category. That is a haunting. That's an active haunting. This poltergeist that was moving things, was throwing things around. I mean, there are various stories that the girls did some of these things, maybe bent spoons themselves or threw things around themselves. When you talk about sort of 14, 12-year-old girls, they're probably going to be muck about a little bit. They probably like the attention. Certainly the fact Maurice Groves is there almost every day was something they quite liked as well, almost showing off. So maybe they did invent some of the stuff. But there are things like the two police officers witnessed with a chair moving. Mum seeing the chest of drawers move across the room. There were witnesses. Other people saw things, literally saw things. There were occasions where the girls would be in bed and the next minute you hear a loud noise, a crash, and the girls are out of bed. Now, maybe they got out of bed themselves, but one occasion, an uncle found Janet lying on top of a radio. I mean, a big radiogram, not a little tiny transistor, obviously. A big radiogram in the room. It's like, how did she even get up there, middle of the night? One of the photographers has set up cameras in the room that would go off if any movement occurred. And you have those very famous photographs of Janet appearing to either levitate across the room or jump across the room, depending on your perspective. Now, Janet was a gymnast. She was actually quite good at it. So there's a real chance that may have been her jumping across the room. But she swears blind it wasn't her. And she swears blind she didn't throw it on top of the radio, which would be quite impressive to have managed to achieve that. So we don't know on that level, those photographs, whether they're genuinely real or not. You'll get people who are adamant either way. Personally speaking, I think Janet jumped. I think they are faked by her, but I don't know. I wasn't there. But that's basically the story of the Enfield Poltergeist in brief.
Yeah, the way that the voice kind of started and manifested and evolved over time reminds me of another well-known case, which is one of my favorites, actually, Jeff the Talking Mongoose.
Oh, yes.
There was, again, a young girl. I think she was similar age to what Janet would have been, maybe a little bit younger. And she, kind of got blamed for or accused of somehow teaching herself ventriloquism at a young age and, doing the voice. But, it was a theme. It was making noises at first, and then that evolved into talking. Like it had to kind of learn how to do that, which I think is kind of interesting. But, you could argue that it was the girl kind of working on their skill and evolving there too.
Possibly. But it's that thing that, I've seen so-called trance mediums in action, and it can be pretty convincing, I have to say. I don't necessarily believe they're being possessed by spirits. I think it's more psychological stuff going on. But again, we talk about collective unconscious psychological, not sort of your standard kind of mad people making things up. There's more going on than that. Now, myself, I experience that sort of thing. I can go into a location and get a sense of the past in the place. I can describe what I'm seeing in my mind, and it's how the place looked long before we were there, like buildings change. So that kind of thing can certainly happen. But I said that the voice is one of those things that really does divide opinions as to how it happened, whether it was real. Now, you could argue, yes, it was physically coming out of her mouth, that her vocal cords were creating it, but it was something speaking through her. Janet herself said that she used to feel like someone was behind her, first of all, and then was almost moved into her. Now, a lot of trance mediums say that's what they experience, this feeling of someone close to them. usually behind them and kind of moving into their mental space, their brain space, if you like, and starting to talk. As far as we know, Janet was always fully conscious and aware of what was being said at the time. She didn't like sort of go off out of the mind to somewhere else, which some transmediums say they do that. They just switch off. They don't know what's going on. Again, we don't know what's going on in their brains. We don't know if that's true or not. But, it's easy to dismiss it as all being just Janet making voices. But there's so much of it, so much of the communication going on. Again, as I said before, what was talked about was a bit odd for an older man to be saying. But again, there was a lot of conversation. So it was a bit of both. I think maybe something was coming through subconsciously, but also she used it herself as a method of vocalizing things she didn't really know how to talk about. I have to say, being a professional psychotherapist, having looked at her being interviewed both when she was young and as an adult now, she is disturbed. I mean, I don't want to go into any detail, but there's clearly something not right, whether it's as a result of these experiences or something else, and these experiences will manifest through what she experienced in the house. I don't know. But when you listen to her sister being interviewed, she seems sort of down to earth and fairly, quote, normal. But Janet, there is something I've missed. She's having worked with people who've been traumatized by experiences. She's had trauma in her life, and I don't just mean the ghosty stuff. I mean something that's traumatized her. Whether it's to do with her father leaving, I don't know. I don't know the background of the detail, but I think that might play a part as well, both in the voice stuff, but also in the actual poltergeist activity, because there's a lot of evidence showing that often when the activity like this, bangs and crashes, things moving, etc., occur, there are often teenage girls in the vicinity going into or going through puberty, suggestion of psych energy kind of being released by this, being sort of blasting out and causing these things to occur. I don't know. There are cases, clear poltergeist, where there's no children involved, it's just adults. So I don't know, but I do think a lot of the time these poltergeists are more of a human thing than a spirit-based, shall we say. Despite what the Warrens might try to claim.
Yeah, she did seem to be, I'll say, troubled, maybe. I mean, we know the father had left, and that was probably hard for her. But we also know that the brother, John, got sent away, essentially. Yes. And I remember hearing the mother talk about that, like feeling like the state stole her child. And I don't know, the details of why that happened. It's not my business, but
as far as I was aware, a lot of truanting from school and getting in a lot of trouble at school. So they went off to a sort of remedial school, as they call them, where they're quite strict to ensure that they sort of learn to behave themselves, basically. I mean, you wouldn't do it today, obviously, and it's not the sort of thing that happened now. But this is the sort of mid-70s. It was a long while ago. So that was often the approach. So he wasn't around for most of the time. So, again, I've never seen him interviewed. The other brother, whose name has escaped me again for some reason, I've heard him being interviewed because obviously he was there, but because John wasn't there for much of it, they've not really spoken to him. But again, if you look at pictures of him as a kid, he does look like he's got problems. You can almost tell by facial expressions he's troubled.
Yeah. And so I've also heard Janet in interviews, or actually, I shouldn't say that. I haven't heard firsthand in their interviews, but I've heard that she's given interviews where she has thanked Lorraine Warren. And, everyone pretty much is on the same page that, she wasn't a part of this, but even Ed Warren gives different information on this.
Oh, yes. This is half the problem.
Yeah, I think in The Demonologist, he says he went alone. But then later on in the website, it says they were both there.
Oh, they were definitely both there. As a guy player spoke to both of them. As I say, we interviewed him and talked to him directly. They were both there. Certainly were.
Yeah, we know Ed was there. He's on tape. I think Lorraine is too.
Well, the one interview I've heard where they're talking to Janet and the voices appeared, I'm sure, obviously, you can hear Ed talk. I'm sure Lorraine was in the background as well. But I think possibly she would have thanked Lorraine because I think Lorraine would have gone in there totally believing her. Everyone else might have been a bit skeptical, a bit unsure. I mean, Morris was unsure, even though he was a believer, he was still unsure. And she went straight in, I would imagine, as a I believe you no matter what, win the girl over, very much so. So that makes sense. You might have said that.
Yeah, and the spiritualists that came in later, when ultimately started dying down, I think is interesting too.
Yeah,
I think they should do that when kids are involved in these things. Not necessarily, someone like Lorraine Warren who looks at things through a particular lens and might, think things are scary and evil, but an adult who has experience and can listen to these kids. And
Well, when we talked to, sorry, so when we talked to Guy about that person, he didn't name them. But I can't. I've actually been trying to find the name. He didn't name that person, but it's in his book, which I'm sure I've got somewhere. This house is haunted, which is about the Enfield Poltergeist, but I can't find it. Since I moved house, a few books probably still packed away. We've got a few boxes still left. But I said, like, what? Basically, what my co-interviewer, I said, what did he say to them? And he said, I don't know really. I never really discussed it. So I don't know what was actually said, but whatever it was, it changed things in the house. So the girls themselves seemed calmer. The house definitely seemed calmer. I don't know if it was an exorcism or what it was. I mean, I wouldn't say an exorcism would work unless you believed it was going to work. Of course, that's how these things work. When you work on those you believe. So what the person said, I don't know, but that did, I say didn't stop, but it dramatically decreased. And of course, with the dramatic decrease of experiences, so the interest faded away. And eventually even Morris Grace, sort of after for 1.5 years of being involved, dropped out as well. What was interesting with Morris's involvement was maybe a bit personal as well, because unfortunately his own daughter had died in a motorbike accident, only a year before, and her name was Janet. So they may have found a connection with this Janet through that fact, but also I think it was very much a personal search for proof of the existence of the paranormal. But he gave fairly regular talks about what he was experiencing there, and the SBI themselves as a body were skeptical of the whole thing. They thought perhaps he got in over his head, was going into deep. And I think it was in the fact that Guy Lime was still involved, that if they continued to be involved, otherwise they may have pulled out the case entirely because it was just getting too fantastical. But what really happened in the house, we have got a fairly good idea from the recordings. As I say, it wasn't like it was days and years of nothing. It was all recorded, but it's all secondhand because of over 200 hours of recording, very little has actually been released to the public. As I mentioned back at the beginning, the Apple Plus, I think it was 3-part docudrama really, used the original recordings. But again, it was only a fraction of them. There's so much out there we've never even had a chance to listen to. The SPR still hold on to and don't allow people to access, which is a real shame. It'd be good if they could digitize the whole collection for everyone to listen to, but it's not happened, which is a real shame.
Yeah, the clips I've heard are, I wouldn't want to hear that coming out of my kid.
Yes. Little disturbing, as I say. It does, when you listen very closely, it does sound like someone trying to sound like an old man. There's little intonations in the voice that's slightly too high pitched that you wouldn't get from a 60-plus-year-old man, unless they had a very squashed throat to have that higher pitch, the tighter vocal cords, even though, as I say, from what they think it was using the false vocal cords to produce the voice.
Yeah.
But obviously, literally, a mouth cavity would be smaller than that of a 60-plus-year-old man. So you do know that this is coming from a kid's voice, or kid's vocal cords, should we say, trying to sound like an old man. Very successfully sound like an old man, but it is not genuine old man's voice.
Yeah, and my personal opinion on it is that there were legitimate things that happened, and then Janet realized she could get attention.
Yeah.
Those things happened and may have made some things happen intentionally as well.
Absolutely no doubt about it. Some of the stuff was definitely the girls faking it. But kids are kids. They're going to do stuff like that. As I said, like the attention, they enjoyed that. Don't want people to go away and leave them. So, you stir up something in order to get a bit more of a reaction. Then you understand why the kids would do that. They don't, for them, this is not science. This is just fun. This is weird, scary stuff, which unfortunately what the problem with ghost investigating overall is that it's not done in the laboratory. It's done out on the streets, out in the real locations where you don't have those sort of clinical conditions that you expect from science. So it always opens that broader picture of you're never going to prove this stuff is real because you can't. But you also can't disprove it completely because you have to prove every single case to be completely false, every single element. You have to say, well, that police officer was lying. Well, of course she wasn't. I mean, she's quite brave to go on TV and say what she said. Got ridiculed in the police station, not surprisingly. And if you watch the video closely, the male officer who was with her and saw it as well, look on his face was like, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. He looks a bit uncomfortable. But she's, no, this happened, Other people, there was a case where lollipop lady, do you know what they have? Kids cross the road, a big stick with stop on for the stop the cars. She was a lollipop lady. Yeah, they work at schools basically so the kids cross over. She said she saw Janet levitate across the bedroom from the street. She said, no, it didn't jump. She wasn't thrown. She just literally levitated across the room. So I swear to God, she said, I saw it. Absolutely saw that happen. As I said, the voice and objects moving were witnessed by various people at the location. They could say, well, the voice is being fake, but the objects were moving as well. There was no teleportations like you see in the Conjuring movie, anything like that. But objects were seen to move. And there was no one anywhere near them. Things you could leave in a room, go out, come back, it moved. So all those kind of classic proper poltergeist activity was occurring. So the voice isn't poltergeist, that's something else. But yeah, so it is a fascinating case, and it's it's never been disproven that it was all fake.
And so I know that there was, a relative close by where they used to go to get away for a bit. But I think at one point either Maurice or Guy Playfair had sent them down to the shore for a week or something.
Yes, that was Maurice actually did that and paid for them to go, to give them a break from all the publicity, just to let them get out of the area. And again, nothing happened while they were away, either in the house or to the family. So that's interesting. It seems to have the combination of the two together, the family in the house, for strange enough to occur.
Do you have any theories on that? Is it, an energy imprint? Not necessarily, a human spirit, but, energy in that location, maybe?
I would go down the lines that it was generated by the girls as psi energy that was causing things to occur. I mean, I don't think it was haunted. I don't think that was a ghost. I don't think Bill Wilkins was really talking to her. Somehow there was some kind of weird connection she'd formed. Possibly with a residual spirit in the house, I don't know. But I think it's more than likely that this was a classic example of psi energy, things happening. I know I've mentioned our show before that we do, but a good example of that was as a psychotherapist. One client in particular, he used to get quite upset, and every time he did, my ceiling would crack. Like a noise in the ceiling. Not just once, but several times. Every time he got upset, you'd hear this crack. It was really for a good 6 months or so. And you'd hear the noise. Even he noticing it, even though he was deep in tears and sadness. I mean, it was obviously dealing with internal issues. But it suggested strongly to me that he was projecting energy that was coming out of him that was causing my ceiling to crack. Because there's nothing up there. It was just a small loft space. There was no access to it. It was actually closed off. So there was nothing could be in there to create that crack. And it was only when he got emotional. So that to me is an example of that kind of psi blast, if you like, of energy going out that's causing things to happen. Now, whether it becomes more consciously directional or is just begins to develop into something else, we've talked on other shows about the idea of the Philip experiment of creating your own ghost. Maybe this gained its own self-momentum, became more and more active because it was being built up over that time of the experiences. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it was a real ghost in the sense of a spirit that was possessing Janet or causing these things to happen. It was a proper poltergeist in the sense of being a spiritual energy that's not a person but a thing, if you like, that starts to become real. One thing it definitely was not was Valak the demon. Absolutely not. I mean, the whole thing is just ridiculous. I mean, Valak is listed as a demon of the Goetia, but is not a giant nun. It's actually quite a small figure riding on I think it's riding on an owl or an animal. I mean, I should know. I've got research, but Valak is definitely not a tall nun with a very big pointy nose. So that
Bathsheba Sherman was a real person, but not a baby killing witch either.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I understand there could be a certain degree of artistic license with these sort of things, but when people start to believe the film version of events as being genuinely real, it's quite frightening. I've mentioned this before. I know, but I had a conversation a couple of years back with someone on good old Facebook talking about the Enfield Poltergeist, and she said, "Oh, the film is largely accurate, it's correct." It's like, well, no, it's not. There's lots of things wrong. These are the various things, including the fact they left out one of the most important people in the investigation, Guy Playfair. I've actually spoken to the guy. He was there. Oh, how do you know he was there? Because he told me, and he's fucking written books about it, and he's been seen now on TV. It's like, well, she wanted to believe the Warren Enfield story that was itself the Conjuration fake story. But, sometimes you can't help it. I mean, quite simple things like nowhere a house like that would have a basement like that as in the film. It doesn't happen. The idea that they would be that kind of financial situation to have a remote control TV in the 1970s, even if the remote control was huge, a remote control TV, I don't think so. Little things like that. It's just, oh no, and they didn't give them lots of crucifixes to stick on the wall. That didn't happen. None of these things happened. There's not even a big tree in the front garden. They actually filmed it in a house about 2 rows along from the real house that was actually happened to be up for sale and was vacant at the time, so they obviously bought the house for the filming. But yeah, so you have whole new layers of nonsense. But yeah, the Warrens certainly liked the story because it was a chance to get themselves more press coverage. It wasn't that long after, of course. They've been dealing with Amityville, so of course they were running a crest of a wave anyway. So a chance to get more publicity, why not? Let's get out there. But so that telling thing that I don't know who Ed said it too, but it wasn't two guys Playfair overheard it and said basically, no, we're not here to make money. It's not what it's about. Kindly leave. And begrudgingly they left. So they're there less than a day.
Yeah, and so I have to look up and figure out what year the Lindsley Street haunting took place. There are a lot of parallels with that.
Okay.
It was a girl around the same age. She was an adopted child who was getting bullied at school. So she, had a lot of stuff going on. But it started in the same way. The family actually called the police, which I always thought was strange in both. But it was a different time, too. Yes. And there was no internet. And not everyone has like an Andy they can call if something happens like I do. Right?
No, exactly.
So, who would you go to? So I guess that part makes sense. But in that case, they ended up calling a priest who said, we can't handle this, but these people called the Warrens can. Well, the Warrens came, and I think it was the next day the family fired them from the case because what they did was they made a bunch of long distance calls from this people's house calling the press there.
Really?
And it was like a circus. Like the police then had to come to do crowd control, basically. So they said, absolutely not. This isn't good for our daughter who is already going through things. Yeah,
exactly. It's benefits of having these experiences that when having someone turn into a circus show like that. Definitely not good.
Yeah, that one had a talking cat also. And I think it was the police officer that reported the cat was talking.
Interesting. I mean, was the cat's mouth moving and the words coming out? I mean, how did that work?
I don't recall them ever giving real good details, but I do remember, I think the cat was singing. It was not singing a Christmas song, but it was saying the words to, I think, Jingle Bells.
Okay.
Something like that. So it was a festive cat.
Yes, I don't know if Ed brought a guitar and started singing Elvis songs to the girls either. I'm not quite sure that happened. But
yeah, I mean, go ahead.
No, so it's interesting how they would latch on to cases like this and put their own spin on them straight away. And the idea of being demonically possessed. I mean, I don't know if they definitely said that they thought the Enfield Poltergeist was a demon, but there's a good chance he would have done because that's the kind of thing they like to say. But to turn it into almost to make the haunting their haunting, if you like, and it mattered to them. It was, and that's what the film does, of course. It turns into completely about them and nobody else. The whole Valak thing is all to do with them. It's like, oh, come on. But how much they would do that, but certainly they would put themselves into all sorts of cases and stories and try and make it about them and introduce their elements into it, which is a real shame because it muddies the waters. If you're trying to get to the real truth of a paranormal activity and you've got showmen turning up and taking over and make it into their own story, then the real story that's going on gets lost. As I say, you could certainly argue that Janet was very disturbed and troubled by what was happening to her. She wasn't enjoying it, but by the same token, it wasn't being listened to, I think, as well. And as I say, I think one thing that possibly Lorraine did was be the first one that openly said, I believe you no matter what. And I think that may have been why she liked her and thanked her. But whereas the others are all skeptical. Now, it's one of those things because if she's completely faking it, that would be odd to sort of thank her for that. It was like, well, what are you trying to achieve? If you're deliberately sitting out to fake this kind of stuff, and you've got these people coming on, they're believing you're not going to say, "Oh, thank you for believing," because you want people to believe you anyway. You know what I'm saying? If she was just faking it, it would be odd to say, "Look, thanks Lorraine for that." I think it's because Lorraine just was prepared to believe before. So maybe that's one small benefit of the Warrens. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think we're really quick to dismiss paranormal experiences when someone also has mental health issues. But I don't know that is correct or valid at all. I think you can have both, and it's paranormal, so it's not understood by science.
Yeah.
So maybe they could be related or intertwined. It doesn't mean it's not happening to them.
No, absolutely. I think that can be the thing we've talked about on another occasion, where traumatic experiences can unlock something in you that means you begin to connect with stuff around you. I'll briefly tell the same story I've told you before about a friend of mine years ago, who was a guy called James, who came on my investigation team. He was a salesman. He was just full of gifts of the gab. He was driving around the country selling stuff. He was sort of tech-based stuff. But anyway, no interest in the ghost, paranormal, supernatural, nothing. It just wasn't anything at all. So he had a car crash. And he literally went flying through the windscreen. Was in hospital. He may have been in a coma, actually, but he was severely injured, head injury. He was in hospital for quite a while of it, and came out of it psychic. He was aware of stuff around him. He couldn't explain it. It was frightening, actually, at first. And he found my group through the internet, which was very helpful. And he joined us and was certainly quite sensitive. He was this rough, big bloke, you would not you'd imagine at all to be interested in the paranormal. But yeah, he said that after this head injury, weird stuff happened in his house. He had poltergeist type activity in the house. That was the first thing he noticed when he got back to his home. Well, things were moving around the house that never happened before. He said, I have no idea what the hell was going on, but it was kind of felt there was something in the house, and said before, I had no interest, no idea, nothing. So you could argue that maybe the trauma created this stuff happening around him, or he became more aware of it. And as you've heard me say before, these things become aware of you and become aware that you're aware of them, and then things start to happen. So maybe that was an example of that. As I say, maybe they did generate, in the Phillips style experiment, unintentionally create this ghost figure in the building, Bill Wilkins ghost in the building, and it was the one that was moving things around. It's hard to say. I think, as we said before, we get stuck in this what we call the object-subject relation idea, that the objects of the world out there and the subjects, us observers, objects independently of each other. That is simply not true. At a quantum physics level, we know the observer affects what they're observing.
Mm-hmm.
And that probably happens in ordinary life as well, that what is out there is also in here with us. And that our perception of reality changes, but the reality around us can change with that perception of change, that we are actually causing things to occur because we're not strictly separated between subject and object.
Yeah. And I used to kind of be offended that they would try to blame poltergeist activity on girls all the time. Now I look at it different, like, maybe, women have that better connection, like women can move things with their mind. But the other thing that kind of made me look at it differently is I don't think I've ever talked about it on my channel. I know I've talked about it on the last episode of High Strangeness Factor, is the poltergeist activity I had with things going missing and then reappearing. And I'm obviously not a teenage girl, but I'm just realizing that started happening around the same time my hot flashes started, which might be TMI for some listeners, but it's the truth of it. So, I mean, same concept as, puberty. There are some, definitely strong emotions there if that can impact something.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as you might remember as well, I've had a couple of poltergeist activity occur in where I've lived in the past. Now, I'm definitely not a teenage girl, that's for certain. But yeah, we've had a few strange things happen in my house. The place lived in London. And my wife and her mum used to live with us. And mum's in the 80s at that point. And my wife's sort of less similar to me, a bit over 50. And we had a couple of strange things occur where objects completely disappeared and then would reappear a month or two later. I've told the story before about a tub of copy decks, which is a glue, which I used to repair vintage fountain pens, and it was actually very good for sealing up the pens. So I had a big tub of that, and it was in a little back room in the flat we had, and it was just there on the windowsill. It used to live. It vanished, just completely disappeared. It was gone for about 2 months. I asked the wife, maybe asked my mother-in-law, she hadn't moved it. It was just gone. There was one day coming home from work, and you'd walk into our flat, and you go up. There's masonettes on 2 levels. You go up the stairs to the second level. You look straight through to the back of the building where my little office was, and it was the middle of the floor, literally sitting in the middle of the floor. It was like, what the hell did that get there? Said mother-in-law hadn't moved it. She wouldn't. It's not the kind of person. Wife not interested, hadn't moved it. It just reappeared about 2 months after it disappeared, and that was pretty strange. The thing is, there was nothing going on at the time. There was no one with any stress or distress that we know of, although there was a family downstairs from us. They did have a daughter who was had problems, shall we say. She was she's been 40 at that point. She was never going to leave home. She had various issues. Maybe she'd had a problem, particularly, and there'd been a blast of energy from her that had moved this Copydex and disappeared. I don't know. That's pure speculation on my part. But yeah, you never know. It's we look for normal logical causality of these things. You know, that X caused Y, therefore X leads to Y. But it doesn't work that way, this sort of stuff. There's no normal causality going on. There's abnormal causality, non-causality occurring, which, as I said just now, getting down to quantum physics, that's how it works down there, that microscopic realm, but subatomic realm. Things happen for no reason. Effects come after the cause, that kind of thing. Simultaneous things occur, things happening differently and depending on how you observe them. It's all real. It's all quantum physics, so maybe this stuff is happening at that kind of level. I don't know.
I did have one incident that may have had a correlation. I know I've told you about like my headphones and my mascara going missing, but did I ever tell you the TV story?
No.
So I don't talk about it a whole lot, but it's probably the most intense paranormal experience I've had if you are looking at it from the outside.
Yeah.
But this was when a couple years ago when I was having those nightmares about my great grandma, and I was still under the impression it was actually my great grandma, like human spirit, trying to bother me. So someone gave me the advice of, like sit down, talk to her, set boundaries, yada, yada. So one day I decided to do that. Right. And I started out very civilly, but I got like heated, partway through it and was like, you can't treat me like this. You're dead. What's your problem? Leave me alone, type of thing. And I was actually sitting right here when I was doing it. And diagonal from me now, there is my dresser. And I used to have my TV on top of that dresser. So I'm sitting right here having this conversation with thin air, yelling at no one. And I get up and I go to walk out of the room, and my TV that is on my dresser flies off my dresser towards me as I'm walking.
Oh, yeah. So you mentioned it, yeah.
All of my cats were accounted for. And the other weird thing was I had a runner on my dresser, and that did not move. Just the TV on top of it.
Very strange, yeah.
Yeah.
That's that kind of thing with poltergeist activity, that you can move the object and the things it's sitting on aren't affected, which again is pretty strange.
Yeah. And I was in denial that it was weird. I'm like, something must have happened that I just can't figure out,
Well, that's the thing. That's a lot of people dismiss these weird experiences. They'll say, "Oh, it was just one of those things. There wasn't anything to it. It was just a bit strange." Well, think about it. What you just described, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, it's when you start to add more and more things, you stop being able to deny and try to reason it away. For me, anyway.
Well, people still do that, as I mentioned in other shows. We talked about this before, where I used to work with a paranormal events company. People would come along with, they'd be the partner of the person's interest. They've come because they're the driver or whatever, not really that bothered. They'd start off being a load of nonsense, and they'd have something happen to them. And they'd often be like, oh, blimey, yeah, I'm not sure I still believe it. I was there, I saw that, or whatever, And the people would often start conversations with, like, I don't really believe in ghosts, but I had this happen. And it's a ghostly experience. I think, well, you don't believe in ghosts, we just tell me ghost stories. Make your mind up. But people don't necessarily want to open that can of worms, because often people see too many horror films and think that's real, and things happen that way, like The Conjuring 2, that think this is how things happen. It's I've said many times, in all the years of paranormal investigating, no one's ever been hurt by anything paranormal. People have hurt themselves by tripping over, falling over, and things like that, but that's been their own fault. They've run away from something, or they've panicked, or whatever. I often tell the story of the Royal Marine who managed to throw himself into a wall and scream like a young girl. Absolutely spooked himself by door banging, turned around, ran into a brick wall and screamed like a girl, like, ah! He was scared. And he's a Royal Marine, high level, like, you what they call US Marines, that's the same kind of people. You bet they're pretty tough and scared of nothing, but he was scared of a banging door and screamed like a girl and ran into a wall. So, these things happen, people hurt themselves, but no, I've seen, not quite saw scratches appear, but I was with the person, the scratches appeared on their back. That was a bit uncomfortable, but didn't really hurt. It just had these marks with like 3 lines on their back that pretty much appeared as you walked down a set of stairs. He said, perfectly fine before. I said, well, this t-shirt's a bit rubbing. I might have got something caught underneath it. We checked, there was nothing on his t-shirt, but there were 3 lines on his back. That's something scratched his back. This is a haunted location. So I've seen that kind of thing, but beyond that, no one's ever been hurt by these things. But
yeah, we don't know the intention behind that either. Like, people assume demonic, but if you are some kind of ball of energy, we'll just say, and you are kind of trying to learn how to interact with the physical world, maybe you try to reach out and tap someone on the shoulder, but you're not very good at it yet.
Yeah.
So you scratch them.
Also, I think as we've said as well, these things, now, whether Enfield was one of these things, I don't know, but what we've said before is these things will adopt an appearance according to what you believe, what your expectation is. So if you expect anything to be scary and demonic, that's probably what you're going to get. If you're a teenage girl or preteen girl and don't know what the hell's going on, you might just get the pure manifestation of bangs and knocks and things moving. And that might be that it manifests that way because they had no expectations of what was going to happen. I mean, it wasn't.
Or a mongoose.
Or a mongoose, exactly, yes.
Yeah, and there is the belief that demons will go for devoutly Christian or Catholic people because your belief is so strong, so it's like more of a challenge and win for them. But those are the people that believe in demons, right?
Exactly.
And I think anxiety and fear are very, very strong emotions. And I know because I've had debilitating anxiety in the past. And you can't see the good in things when you're in that kind of mindset. If you're worrying about demons and evil all day, eventually you'll find it.
You're going to manifest it yourself, quite literally. Which is what unfortunately can tend out. That's why you often find they get it right. The one thing they do around the horror films is they tend to be, say, Catholic families who have the demon experiences, whereas those non-Catholics don't tend to, because it's not what expected. I would honestly say with absolute certainty that in all the years investigating I've been involved in, I'm talking, God, nearly 40 years when I think about it. My late teens I got involved, so it's like proper writing. Never once anything I'd ever have said was demonic. Never. Things have been aggressive and unpleasant, but not. There's no sort of cloven hooves or flaming horns or any of that kind of stuff, or a sense of something out of. And I do study the occult, very, very knowledgeable, I must admit, on the occult. So I know what to expect if such things ever turned up. They never do. But again, working with that kind of stuff, these things only manifest that way because that's what you expect of them. People have different experiences of the same entity and describe different experiences they have, but it's often to do with their mindset, how they experience these things. So I'm not saying I don't think demons exist in the traditional biblical sense of demons, because I think that's the way people understood. We said now mental illness, particularly in possession, that kind of thing. That's how it was understood in those days. But the kind of forces we're talking about will manifest in the way that you expect them to manifest, based on your expectations and understandings of them.
Yep. Oh, and I was scrolling through videos on TikTok last night, and I saw one that made me think of you, and I think you would appreciate it. It was a woman who had translated a 3,000-year-old Canaanite curse and was going to use it to try to curse Netanyahu.
All right. Good luck with that.
I thought that was great. But maybe if she can get enough people on TikTok to put that thought energy into it.
You never know the kind of combined powers. I think don't get into politics at all, of course, but people often don't realize there is a version of evil and demonic in Judaism that they don't know a lot about, that isn't talked about very much, called the Sitra Achra, which I've written a book about, funny enough, a bit advertising there. But there is a very dark demonic realms that people like Netanyahu could find themselves falling into. Or what would happen is, in the mythology, is these demons will come for you and drag you into their realm because you've transgressed. They can't get you if you don't transgress, but you can say he's actually a transgression, so he will be dragged into those realms. But yeah, that's what I'm saying here, is also that those demons don't possess people. If you want to talk about the idea of demonic possession, it comes from medieval times. No other than that, really. And again, it's definitely, most of it is people who are being described as being, quote, possessed, are showing mental illness. They're having even things like epileptic fits, that kind of stuff. That's what people are seeing, and have no comprehension whatsoever what's going on. I mean, it wasn't until relatively recently, really, the 1600s, that we realized what the brain was, this lump of clay in the head, actually what it did. For a long time, people thought the center of being, as in your consciousness, was in the heart. The heart was the key factor. Now we know it is key because without your heart you die, but it doesn't control things the way in which people thought in those days. It is entirely the brain, this mushy stuff in the head, that's doing all of that. So,
yeah. Speaking of your books,
oh yes.
Before we go, you want to tell people what books you have that are out there and where they can find them?
Sure, I've a few books published. Some have sold out completely, others are still available. My probably the one I've been known for most is a book called The Wicked Shall Decay, which is a collection of spells and charms. That's the one, indeed. Published by Three Hands Press, which is that collection of medieval and more recent spells, charms, incantations. It was from my collection of folklore books, which I've got from a society called the Folklore Society, who publish books. I still publish up to today now, but I've got some of them from the 1800s up to the 1930s. And they were collections of tales and stories, but they actually included real, genuine charms and magical stories and magical spells, that sort of thing, which you could use yourself. And I compile them into that book with a long introduction and some descriptive material of that. I've also written a book called Runa, The Wisdom of the Runes, which is on runes, obviously, judging by the title. That's with Troy Books, which you can get over there as well as over here. And the couple of books that are out of print at the moment is Liber Coronzon, which is about Enochian magic, which maybe we'll talk about another time with Dr. John Dee. That should be published at some point in the near future, eventually, by Three Hands Press, who published Wicked Shall Decay as a second edition. They've actually got that at the moment. And I have my own publishing company, which is Ninth Circle Press. The first book was the Suffolk Sitra Achra, which is about the demonic I was just talking about. That's actually out of print. It's sold out completely, which I'm very pleased about. And the second book from Ninth Circle Press, written by a friend of mine, Richard Ward, is all about witchcraft and magic of Essex. Essex in the UK is the origin of a lot of contemporary witchcraft. It's influenced a lot of what we call traditional witchcraft, as opposed to Wicca, which is Joe Gardner. The reaction of what's called traditional witchcraft is trying to draw from real sources, and he talks about a guy called James Cunning Murrell, who was very important, cunning man from the Victorian age in Leigh-on-Sea in Essex, and about a guy called George Pickingill, who was actually a myth and not really who he appears to be. He's often described as being this great magician from which a cunning man from Canewdon in Essex. But the chances are it's actually James Murrell was the real person. This Pickingill name was added to it, but he talks about all sorts of, from the 1600s up to the present day, witchcraft and magic from Essex. Also have a book called Underworld Gnosis, which is about Dante's Inferno. That's the one there. Also from Dance Press, also out of print, unfortunately. Although I may read it myself, actually, at some point in the future. That was written during COVID. The whole thing's written in 3 months, which for me was a lightning fast writing. So it was a bit shorter than it could have been. There's some stuff I've left out that I could definitely have worked on. And the idea would be to produce a copy with Dante's Inferno as in one volume together at some point in the future. So
yeah, it is a great book. It is on the shorter side, but it really makes you start to think about a lot of things and where these ideas came from. Like, we could probably do a whole other show about that.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Go on, Dante. Yes, I'm obsessed with Dante, particularly Inferno, which is it kind of is in the full circle, because Inferno defines what hell is like. It has been the influencer, the foundation of the modern ideas of hell, and the different layers and different reasons you might end up in hell. Main comes from Dante.
Yeah, so it was like the Conjuring franchise of his time in book form that put all these ideas in our heads.
Yes, absolutely.
And just to remind everyone, you can find both me and Andy and our friend who shall not be named on this episode right now because this is our day without him on the High Strangeness Factor on the Paranormal UK radio network, and also occasionally on Mac Maloney's Military X Files.
Yes, we both gate crash that occasionally, don't we? This is very good fun. It's probably one of the most chaotic shows I've ever been involved with. So it was a great fun because you never know what's going to happen next with them. They don't seem to have any kind of agenda or plan.
Yes, so I don't know if you felt this way. I was a bit nervous the first time I went on, thinking, you know, it was so much chaos with so many people on there, but it's just fun, you know.
Yeah. So it seems to work. I mean, I've been doing these podcasts about things for quite a few years. I was always intrigued by their show. I used to listen to it. I still do occasionally, must admit. But yeah, so I think, how does that work? How do they not end up talking over each other? But they seem to manage it. You usually got at least 6 people on screen at the same time. But they always manage to not talk over each other, which is quite an art, I have to say.
It is impressive. But yeah, I don't know how Mac is some kind of puppet master, I think.
Especially he sort of sits there side on with his sunglasses on, his hat on the whole time. I think, can he even see what's going on? He doesn't look at the camera at all. Somebody seems to manage it.
Man of mystery.
Indeed. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much. This was super fun. We'll have to do it again.
Yeah.
Maybe with or without Steve. We'll decide if we want to invite him.
Well, we can play with the old man's away. I want to say one last thing. We managed to get through an entire show without mentioning a certain name. Well, you did it.
K-word.
Yes, we did it. And if you wonder what the K-word is, you have to watch and listen to our other shows to find out what that is.
I didn't even get close.
No. He'd played no role in the Enfield Poltergeist whatsoever. So there you go.
Impressed. I'm proud of us.
Indeed.
It's a new page. Well, thank you very much, Andy. I'm sure we'll do this again soon.
I'm sure.
And thanks everyone for watching. Have a good night.
Night.